The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today that is all around VMware vSphere 5.5 end of support and what to do next. So presenting the webinar today we have Chris from Extrovert and also Lawrence from Extrovert, and then Peter Ely from Byte Software Services. Okay, so before I hand over to Chris to run through the main part of the webinar, I'm just going to go through some housekeeping details with you. So you are muted throughout the webinar today, but if you do have any questions at all, there is a questions box just to the right-hand side of your screen. So if you pop them there, we will answer those at the end of the webinar in the Q&A session. We're also recording the webinar today, so I'll send you all a link to the recording either this afternoon or tomorrow morning. And there are a couple of questions at the end, so if you would like any further information, if you just pop that in there, one of our specialists will be in touch with you. Okay, so I'm now going to pass you over to Chris.
Good morning, everybody. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. Welcome to the session. As Amy said, we're going to discuss the impact of vSphere 5.5 end of general support and the options you have. My name is Christopher Lewis. I'm a lead consultant of Extrovert, and I specialise in data center virtualization and transformation piece, as well as cloud management and automation. So let's get this started. So at a high level, we're going to talk about what does end of general support mean to you as customers, what will happen to your vSphere 5.5 infrastructure, and what if you don't do anything, and what the options are if you want to do something, and how we can help you do that. And then, as Amy said, we'll have some time for questions at the end. So what does end of general support actually mean? So let's first look at the vSphere product timeline. So initially delivered in 2013, we're now reaching what VMware class the end of general support, and at that point vSphere 5.5 will go into what they class as technical guidance phase until 2020. And if we look at vSphere 6 as an example, again, it has a 5-year life cycle where we have a general support phase, and then we move into a phase of technical guidance for 2 years, and then the end of support will happen in 2022. And in vSphere 6.5 or 6.7, recently released, again, a 5-year life cycle and then a 2-year end of technical guidance, until end of technical guidance, and then it'll stop all support. So the blue line there is where we, a rough estimate where we are in those timelines. So what does it actually mean? So during general support phase, VMware will provide you with maintenance upgrades, security patches, bug fixes. They'll support new hardware as it comes out. They provide you with the ability to file support requests over the phone and via the internet, as well as access to all their current bug fixes, patches, self-help pages, and their knowledge base. But once we end general support, what you actually get is no new bug fixes or upgrades, no new hardware support, and you can only file support requests via the web, so you can't actually talk to anybody. And they're basically encouraging you to move on by reducing the amount of support that they provide, because over a 5-year period, lots of things have moved on in that time frame from a hardware point of view, and the new features and new technology that are coming out at a rapid pace. So what products are actually affected by the end of general support coming up in with vSphere 5.5? So we've got vSphere 5.5, vCenter, data protection, which is an intrinsic part of vSphere. vSAN 5.5 will go end of life end of support as well. Site Recovery Manager, the Nexus virtual switch that they supported for a long time will go into support. If anybody's using integrated OpenStack, then that will go into support at 3.1. and so will NSX for vSphere 6.2. So there are other products as well that obviously there's a 5-year life cycle for most products with VMware, so there will be other products that are going into support in the future as well. So I guess the key question is what's going to happen to my vSphere 5.5 infrastructure that's been running quite nicely for the last 5 years. You may have had a few issues and those have been resolved, but it's currently ticking over without any real issues. So the good news is that environment won't stop when the end of support life happens. That will continue to run as it does today, as long as there's no major issues. But the bad news is that expanding that infrastructure will become a lot more difficult because as the product is 5 years old, the hardware vendors, so hardware vendors, servers, storage, they'll start to phase out support for vSphere 5.5. So it'll come to a point where you can't actually buy supported hardware. So the new operating systems won't be supported. So going forward, I think Windows 2019, as an example, is supported, but anything after that probably won't be. They'll likely third-party companies, so your backup software, your antivirus software, anything like that, will again phase out support because it's a 5-year-old product and they don't necessarily want to continue support for that. And as we sort of said before, there'll be no new features. So all the new things around hybrid cloud or secure boot or sort of virtual TPM aren't included in 5.5. So you're not getting all those new features because the product's old and not being maintained. So should you upgrade or migrate? It's a question we're asked quite often. So for me, an upgrade is where you, a migration is where you deploy a new environment in a greenfield and you do workload migration. So you're not, so you deploy the greenfield, you move your workloads from one environment to another. From an upgrade perspective, so to me, there's two scenarios. There's the in-place upgrade where you upgrade your vCenter and your ESXi host in situ, and that enables you to retain all the existing vCenter metrics if that's important to you, so the performance metrics. And then scenario 2 is a sort of a hybrid, but I still class it as an upgrade, is where you deploy the management components. So you deploy a vCenter, a new vCenter server, and a new platform service controller, if that's the way you want to do it. And then you import your existing ESXi hosts, storage, and virtual machines into that and upgrade them as part of those components. But in that way, you would tend to lose your existing performance metrics for vCenter. And sometimes that's important to customers to have that historic sort of a performance metric. So what are your high-level options? So for me, there are 5 main options if you want to remain on-premise. So there's the do nothing, and we'll go through each of these. There's the upgrade to vSphere, there's a migrate to vSphere 6.5 and 6.7, there's an upgrade to 6.5, and there's an upgrade to 6.7. And hopefully it will come apparent why I've split them out like that over the next few sets of slides. To a lesser extent, you could migrate to another hypervisor, you could migrate to the private cloud, and you could migrate to a VMware cloud service. But what we're going to concentrate today on is the on-premise options. So the do nothing approach, and for me, it's a valid approach. Okay, so just for avoidance of doubt, that's the leave the environment as is, do not migrate, do not upgrade from vSphere 5.5. Now, there are business reasons for doing that. There's, the environment is due to be decommissioned either before the end of general support or maybe even before the end of technical guidance. Some or all of the applications may be being moved to a different environment already. So again, there's potentially no need to run an upgrade project for that vSphere 5.5 environment. And finally, there may be already a strategic project underway where you're want to move to a new version of vSphere and you're centralized, you might have multiple vSphere 5.5 environments and you're moving those workloads away. So there's nothing to do in the vSphere 5.5 environment. So from a risks point of view, so obviously your ongoing support is limited, and we sort of discussed that in the previous slide. One of the most important things for me is for the business to understand the risks associated with the do nothing approach, because whilst there may not be budget, if you suddenly turn around to the business and say, well, we can do nothing because we haven't got budget, but you have to understand that if there's a problem, or there's a new security bug, there's a new security vulnerability like the Meltdown or Spectre, then there's nothing we can do to the underlying infrastructure because VMware aren't going to support us. So that's a risk that they need to accept. I don't advocate the do nothing approach. I think something, if the environment is going to be maintained, then it should be upgraded. So what I've done is I've split this into talking about the vSphere, what's new in the features from vSphere 6 to 6.5 to 6.7, and then after each of those we'll talk about the upgrades and migrations associated with that. So what's new in vSphere 6 compared to vSphere 5.5? So in vSphere 5.5 they introduced an appliance-based version of the vCenter. In vSphere 6 that's reached feature parity with the Windows version. So in 5.5 there were some things you could do in Windows that you couldn't do in the appliance. Now in vSphere 6 that's feature parity. They've moved away from the SSO single sign-on service to a platform service controller which handles single sign-on but also handles things like certificate authority and other core services and moves them away from the vCenter. You can now have a linked mode, which is similar to a single sign-on, where you can link multiple platform services controllers together to see a consolidated view of your vSphere infrastructure. So if you had multi-site or more than one vCenter in a site and you wanted to see those in a single console, that's what link mode is for. You have content libraries, so the ability to subscribe to create a content library in one vCenter environment and subscribe to that content library in another vCenter environment, so you can synchronize templates, ISO files, and so on and so forth, so you can have a centralized repository of images. And then the vSphere Flex client, so the Flex client has been enhanced compared to the vSphere 5.5 Flex client. So in vSphere 6, you also get cross vSwitch vMotion, so moving from one virtual machine from one vSwitch to another. Cross vCenter migration, so you can move from one link mode vCenter to another, and then long distance migration, so they don't necessarily have to be in the same site, they can be in separate sites, and an enhanced network I/O control and storage I/O control modules to address the noisy neighbor syndrome in vCenter if you have that. So from a storage perspective, we've got vSAN 6.2, and we've got a slide on that next. Virtual volumes introduction, and storage-based policy management, where and that is where you place a virtual machine on a particular storage platform based on a certain set of policies or the requirements of that virtual machine. So that could be RAID level, it could be protection, it could be multiple things that you assign to the virtual machine, and vSphere chooses which is the best storage to use for that. Also, from an availability perspective, we've got enhanced fault tolerance. So we can have, historically, you only had a single or two CPU sort of limit for fault tolerance, and that's now increased to 4 in certain versions of the product. They've also introduced virtual machine component protection, which is allowing HA to occur in the event of an APD on all paths down or permanent device loss, storage failure, whereas previously it was only to do with networks. It really didn't take into consideration if I lost storage, should I be failing over high availability in vSphere. Okay, so what's new in vSAN 6 or 6.2? So stretched clusters was introduced in 6.2. So that is, rather than having vSAN on a single site, you can now have a vSAN cluster across sites, 2 data sites plus a third witness. And that allows you to have RAID 1 protection across those data sites. There is a high bandwidth, low latency link requirement between those sites, but that means that in the event of a failure in site 1, you can have almost 0 data loss and quick recovery in site 2. So deduplication and compression was introduced now in vSAN 5.5. You know, it wasn't necessarily a feature parity with your traditional SAN vendors that were giving you sort of all flash and deduplication and compression algorithms to reduce the amount of space required to store your data on their SAN storage. Now in vSAN 6, they have included that, so you now get the removal of redundant data blocks and the compression to remove the redundant data, and it's a space efficiency feature. So the actual ratio is shown in vCenter, and it's calculated by vCenter and vSAN, and that ranges typically from 2 to 1 in a standard SDDC environment up to sort of 10 to 1 in a VDI environment where all the files are very similar. So you can get some real cost savings or space savings on the vSAN now. They also introduced a RAID coding or RAID 5, RAID 6. So previously you could only have RAID 1, which had a cost associated with it in terms of space. But now they've introduced a RAID 5 and RAID 6 fault tolerance model. So there is a requirement around the number of hosts, as it says there. So RAID 5 is 4 hosts, so 3 plus 1 failure to tolerate, and RAID 6 is 4 plus 2 failures to tolerate. So that means that you can tolerate 2 hosts going down in that vSAN cluster and still have your VM running unimpacted. And then when those hosts come back up again, then the data is synchronized and your protection then stays the same. So from a space efficiency point of view, compared to RAID 1, your 100 gigabyte virtual machine, as an example, that would take up 200 gigabytes worth of raw storage, now is only in RAID 5 is now only taking 133 gigabytes of raw storage. And from a RAID 1 perspective, where you wanted to have RAID 1 with 2 levels of failure to tolerate, so you could tolerate 2 hosts failed in a RAID 1 array, you would actually have to have, for every 100 gigabytes, 300 gigabytes of raw storage. And now that's with RAID 6, where you have the failure to tolerate 2. That's now 150 gigabytes. So it's a massive saving in terms of raw storage capacity. It is an all-flash, just like deduplication and compression, it's an all-flash configuration only. But we're typically seeing that all-flash configurations are the norm these days because the cost of flash drives is coming quite reasonable. So why would you upgrade to vSphere 6? So it's important to note that any of the upgrades, you need to be at vSphere 5.5 update 3. So if you're not up there, then you need to get to there first before you can do any upgrades. So the main reasons for upgrading to vSphere 6, from my point of view, is that there may be other products such as Horizon View. There's certain versions that will work in vSphere 6 but won't work in vSphere 6.5. So if you're running like a VDI environment that's running that version of View, then you're, without doing a upgrade to View, you're restricted to which version of vSphere you can go to. And when you have a deadline, like an end of support deadline, what you want to do is try and reduce the complexity. So you don't want to have a multifaceted, multi-phased, or necessarily have a multifaceted, multi-phased upgrade process, because you need to get into support again. The reasons for going to 6 would, is that's one of the reasons. So also, it's not just VMware products, your backup products, your replication products, any sort of integrated antivirus, any sort of hardware support. Your hardware may not be certified on vSphere 6.5 or 6.7. Remembering that, as we said before, if you deployed a vSphere 5.5 when it first came out, your hardware is 5 years old, and it's possible that the hardware isn't supported. And another reason is, so for me, a strategic planning exercise. So you may have other vSphere 6 or 6.5 environments already, and this is your last 5.5 environment, and actually you want to move it to 6 so that you can then do a wholesale version 6 to 6.5 or 6.7 migration, and so you just need to get the first step done. And the other reasons to do it is, if the do nothing approach, if you chose the original do nothing approach, and because you're decommissioning the project, if that's already delayed, and the business still want to maintain support, then you're going to have to do something. And so the easiest thing to do if the decommissioning project is still continuing is to upgrade to vSphere 6, because that gives you till March 2020 to finish that decommissioning project. Now, of course, the risk is that vSphere 6 end of general support is March 2020, so it's a short-term fix. And if you do decide to move to version vSphere 6, then my recommendation would be you need to start planning your next upgrade the day after you finished doing your vSphere 6 upgrade. What's the actual process to upgrade? So, if you've got a 5.5 environment, you need to, if you've got an integrated SSO environment for 5.5, you will need to make that external. That's recommended to be now an external SSO environment, so that when we upgrade to 6, it becomes a platform service controller. We then upgrade to vCenter 6 Server 6. We upgrade Update Manager to version 6. We upgrade the host to vSphere 6. We upgrade the virtual machines, their VM hardware versions and tools, and then we upgrade the storage to the version of VFMS5, which is what's supported in 6. Now, from a migration perspective, similar sort of amount of steps. So you deploy the platform service controller optionally. So you may decide to do, if it's a single vCenter environment managing a few hosts, you might just decide to deploy a vCenter server with an embedded platform service controller, and that's a valid topology. Deploy Update Manager, add your 5.5 hosts, upgrade your host to 6, upgrade your virtual machines, upgrade your storage to VFMS5. So very similar sort of steps, but the deploy and migrate tends to be less risk if you're happy with not having those performance metrics from vCenter. Okay, so moving on to vSphere 6.5. What do you get in vSphere 6.5? So we've got Update Manager now. So previously and historically, Update Manager is a Windows virtual machine that requires a SQL database or a SQL Express database for non-production environments. In vSphere 6.5, what VMware have done is they've integrated that into the vCenter product. So if you're deploying the appliance, you've removed the reliance on Windows and SQL completely from that management stack. So license saving there from a Microsoft perspective on a SQL Server license rather than an operating system license, because historically what I've seen is that you tend to license all your hosts for operating systems and not necessarily SQL Server. So yeah, Update Manager is now included. You now get predictive DRS, which, so previously DRS was either sort of reactive or balanced. So reactive being moving workloads as they become problems during the day to less busier hosts. So identifying that problem, DRS identifying that problem and migrate it. A balanced view being constantly moving machines around to make sure the hosts are balanced from a resource perspective. But what predictive DRS does, in conjunction with vReliance Operations Manager, is predict when you're going to have resource contention based on trends in your infrastructure that is monitoring, and proactively migrate those workloads around so that they don't become a problem. Various API enhancements as well. So if you want to deploy virtual machines or storage and you want to do that in a scripted manner, then there's quite a few API enhancements in 6.5. And in general, I think it's touted at around 2 times the performance enhancements from a 6 to a 6.5 environment from a VCSA perspective. So you also get enhanced security. So VM encryption, which is basically each virtual machine is encrypted. It's a per virtual machine setting, so it's not across the board. You can choose to encrypt that virtual machine. You do need a KMS to do that, so encryption key management server, and they can only be unencrypted by the administrator. That actually introduces a new cryptographic administrator role. No cryptographic administrator role, which is an administrator that can't unencrypt virtual machines. You then have encrypted vMotion. So by default, virtual machines that are encrypted will be encrypted during transit between one host and another. That means that if one host supports VM encryption and the other host doesn't, then that vMotion won't occur. But you can also encrypt the vMotion of non-encrypted virtual machines, assuming that both hosts participate in the encryption process. You've also got secure boot. So secure boot is part of the UEFI firmware standard, which basically means that when the ESXi host boots up, it checks to make sure that all of the drivers and the apps that are running in the operating system are certified and cryptographically signed. And if they're not, then it doesn't boot up. So that's like a protection against attacks of that sort of nature. From an availability perspective, in 6.5 they introduced something that lots of people have been asking for a long time, and that's vCenter high availability. So now you can enable vCenter high availability. That is basically a replicated copy of your vCenter. So in the event that the primary vCenter goes down, the secondary vCenter takes over, and it's sort of configured identically, and it's basically quicker than doing a HA event in for your vCenter. So whilst traditionally you would protect your vCenter via vSphere HA, using vCenter high availability, you haven't got to boot your Windows virtual machine or your Linux-based appliance. It's there and ready to take over in a lot shorter time than a HA event would take. So it also introduced VMware, so VM to VM restart rules. So you can say, whereas traditionally you'd be able to say, restart these machines in the event of a HA event, restart these machines on another host. You can now say, restart these machines on another host, but restart this group of virtual machines, so your Active Directory, as an example, directory services group, before I start my servers. So make sure that the necessary components are up before I start those servers. So typically we see that maybe in an application level. So restart my database server before I restart my application server, before I restart my web servers, so that they all come up in the right order, rather than all coming up together in a random order and then having to fix sort of application level problems because of the restarting in the wrong order. And then from a cloud native perspective, vSphere 6.5 introduced vSphere integrated containers, which allows you to run container workloads, Docker, on your ESXi host as well. So if that's the sort of thing that you're interested in, then that can natively run on the hypervisor. And also, so from a 6.5 perspective, if you wanted or you were considering in the future to look at something like VMware Cloud on AWS, that's natively supported in vSphere 6.5 as well. Just looking at the time. Okay. So from a vSAN 6.6 perspective, so one of the big things in vSAN 6.6 was encryption, data encryption at rest. So rather than separate to VM encryption, where you encrypt the virtual machine, from a vSAN perspective, we can encrypt the whole of the data store, a whole of the vSAN, and all machines are in there and encrypted at rest. And we've had a few customers, especially financial institutions, who want to be able to do that. And typically, previously, that wasn't that was a sort of an entry blocker for them to use vSAN, because their traditional SAN vendors would allow them to do that, but vSAN didn't. So now you can do encrypted data at rest. It also so it's a hybrid and all-flash configurations. It supports deduplication and compression, which is important because an encrypted VM using VM encryption can't be deduplicated and compressed. So there's no space saving there. But using vSAN encryption and encrypted data at rest, that virtual machine doesn't necessarily have to use VM encryption, and therefore can be deduplicated and compressed. But again, you need an encryption KMS to hold the keys to do that. What they also introduced in vSAN 6.6 was fault tolerance method into stretched cluster. So previously, you could, in a vSAN stretched cluster in 6.2, your data ran in one site, and if there was a failure, it failed over to the second site. In vSAN 6.6, what you can now do is you can have a level of failure in one site before that data moves across to the secondary site, and then a level of failure in the secondary site before the data becomes corrupted or lost. So you can have RAID 1, RAID 5, RAID 6 in the primary site. So you can have one failure to tolerate for RAID 1, or 1 to 3 RAID 1, 1 to 3 failure to tolerate in RAID 1, 1 failure to tolerate in RAID 5, 2 in RAID 6, and then you can fail over on the RAID 1 protection group, and then do the same thing in the secondary site. So that's a lot more flexible for customers. And then also in vSAN 6.2 and 6, all of the vSAN replication traffic was multicast, which historically has been an issue for network administrators. Now in vSAN 6.6 and above, all of the vSAN traffic is now unicast, which means you don't have to configure multicasting on your underlay network. So why would you upgrade to vSphere 6.5? So again, to be clear, the approach would be to upgrade from vSphere 5.5 update 3 to vSphere 5. And to me, the business reasons for doing this, it's a good option in a low complexity vSphere environment. If you have, one vCenter, a few hosts that are running 5.5 and the hardware is supported, then 6.5 is your best option. Because if you go to 6, then you're going to have to upgrade again soon. 6.5 gives you lots of new functionality that over and above 6, reducing the licensing cost. So you can't necessarily, if you've already bought a license, you can't necessarily give it back, but you can repurpose that license for SQL Server or for something else. So you've got the increased infrastructure availability around vCenter HA, and all those other features we've talked about over and above what you get in 6, obviously subject to the version or the license that you have. So what are the risks? So similar to 6, is your hardware supported? It's a question you need to look at. So again, because it's 5-year-old, potentially up to 5 years old, it may not be supported in 6.5. There's every possibility, and when I was looking into this for this presentation, there's still quite a lot of hardware that is supported. The question then becomes, am I getting enough bang for my buck for the hardware I'm using? So my 5-year-old legacy hardware may support 6.5, but if it's 6 cores, 12 threads, maximum of 128 gig of RAM running at 900 watts in a data center? Am I better having a 20, 30 core server, up to 512 gigabytes of RAM running at 400 watts? It really depends on the hosting model, because obviously you'll get more virtual machines on those bigger hosts at potentially a lower wattage. So it's definitely worth looking at. But the good thing is, if you move to your current host to 6.5, then there's nothing stopping you adding new hosts to deployed at 6.5, bigger, better hosts, and then moving your workloads between clusters in a vCenter is a lot easier than doing a full vCenter to vCenter workload migration. The other risk is obviously upstream and downstream dependencies. Does your software, hardware support network? Is your network going to support? You might want to have 10 gigabit networking and so on and so forth. So is that support around the vSphere there as well? So what does the upgrade process look like? So you can upgrade, still maintaining the Windows vCenter or the Linux appliance. What you can actually do is you can migrate your Windows vCenter to the VCSA 6.5. So you can upgrade to Windows 6.5 if you want to, but you can migrate from Windows to the Linux appliance, remembering that whilst we're at feature parity at the moment, in the future, what you'll see in the slide in a minute, 6.7 is the last version that they'll have Windows vCenter. So if you're not on the Windows if you're not on the Linux vCenter server appliance, then you need to start thinking about moving to that. So if you have an external platform service controller, it's optional. Then you need to upgrade it to 6.5. It's only optional because if you don't have it, then you don't need to do it. You can migrate or upgrade to your vCenter to 6.5. Enable HA, it's optional. Upgrade your host to 6.5, upgrade your virtual machines, upgrade VMware to version 6. From a deploy and migrate perspective, you optionally deploy a platform service controller, deploy the vCenter server appliance. The recommendation from me and the general recommendation around the sort of the community is, if you can deploy the VCSA appliance rather than Windows do, you may have a rule or a directive in the company that says you can't, you have to deploy Windows, and that's fine, but the recommendation would be to deploy 6.5 appliance. Add the 5.5 host, upgrade the 5.5 host to 6.5, upgrade the virtual machines, hardwares and tools, and then upgrade your data stores to VMware 6. I'll go through this quickly. So from a vSphere 6.7 perspective, it's VCSA only. Much more, the jump between the performance in 6.5 to 6.7 is quite remarkable. Again, probably about 2 times efficiency. You can now have enhanced link mode with an embedded platform service controller. So in the previous, 6.5, the recommended topology was to have an external platform service controller for doing single sign-on and having multiple vCenters talking to a single platform service controller. With the advent of VMware Cloud on AWS, where platform service controllers are embedded into the vCenter, they've turned around and said, well, actually, will now support embedded platform service controller with enhanced link mode, so you can now have multiple vCenters connected via enhanced link mode, so you can view them in the same client, but they no longer have to be external, they can be embedded. vSphere Quick Boot, so both the ESXi host and the vCenter appliance are a lot quicker to reboot. There's a single reboot upgrade, whereas there were multiple phases in 6.5 and 6. And then support for this 4K storage, which is the sort of new type of storage that's coming out. From a security perspective, so on top of all the VM encryption stuff, they now support the virtual trusted platform module. So that allows you to have, for example, in a Windows 2016 or Windows 10 point of view, it's a virtualized version of the TPM, so physical TPM. It does require you to have VM encryption, but it's portable. So a virtual machine that has a virtual TPM isn't tied to a particular host. It's portable and you can move it between hosts, and it's encrypted within the virtual machine files, and there's a minimal overhead for doing that encryption. There's also support for TPM2, which is ensuring that your hosts are secure and the authenticity of the host is sound. Support for Microsoft virtualization-based security and credential guard in Windows 10 and Windows 2016, which basically means that the vSphere virtual machine runs a form of nested virtualization. So when you enable VBS, the vSphere virtual machine runs the Microsoft hypervisor. The Microsoft hypervisor runs the Windows 10 or Windows 2016 virtual machine. But there are some sort of requirements around that. You need to be a hardware version 14. You have to have secure boot. You have to use EFI firmware rather than sort of traditional firmware. So there are some requirements around that. And then finally, encrypted vMotion now can happen across vCenters if you have that. Various enhancements around VDI for sort of CAD work and stuff like that, and NVIDIA Grid. A lot quicker sort of cloning of virtual machines. You can now, historically, where you'd have to have enhanced vMotion capability, so the ability to strip out processor instruction sets to ensure that new and old processors in the same cluster can move virtual machines. You can now do that on a per VM basis. And then support for hybrid link mode into hybrid cloud, so the VMware Cloud on AWS. So what's new in vSAN 6.7? You've got a new flashy HTML5 interface that's come along with vSphere vSphere 6.7. So it's near feature parity in the vSphere 7 HTML5 client. You've also, if you're running VROPs, you can bring in the vSphere and the vSAN dashboards into the HTML5 client now with the right plugin. So you don't have to context switch between VROPs and vSAN and vSphere clients. You can do that from one dashboard. vSAN now supports cluster services using iSCSI, physical and virtual clustering, typically used RDMs. Now you can use the vSAN data store as a target. From a stretch cluster point of view, you can now, there's much more efficient resync of data. You can separate the witness traffic from the vSAN replication traffic, and in the event of a failure in the primary site, what tended to happen is that when the primary site came back up again, some virtual machines would become unavailable because they would try and bind themselves back to the primary site. Now in the preferred site override, you can force the machines to stay in the secondary site until you're ready to move them back. Native 4K drive support, because that's introduced in line with vSphere 6.7, and then this sort of federal FIPS support for security validation. And a few more slides. So from an approach perspective, so vSphere 6.7 is a multi-hop upgrade. So you upgrade from 5.5 update 3 to 6 or 6.5, and then upgrade from 6 or 6.5 to 6.7. Why is there a reason to do 6.7 at the moment? For me, only if there's a must-have feature that's not in 6.5. Or you want to be completely hybrid cloud ready, because while 6.5 introduces that, 6.7 is much more native. Again, same sort of risks. You know, the hardware is unlikely to be supported in 6.7. That's not a guarantee. You know, that still may be. Your backup replication software may not be supported in 6.7. So again, that's a more of a bigger project. And to me, it's a complicated upgrade path, which we'll see in a second. So you basically upgrade to 6.5. This is the 6.5 upgrade rather than the 6.0. Migrate to the VCSA, upgrade your hosts, upgrade your virtual machines, upgrade to VMware 5, then do an in-place upgrade to your platform service controllers if they're external, upgrade to the VCSA to 6.7, upgrade your hosts, that should say 6.7, not 6.5, upgrade virtual machines, and then upgrade to VMware 6. So it's a lot longer in terms of a process. So we've talked about upgrades, so let's talk about migration very quickly. So from a migration perspective, deploy a greenfield version 6, vSphere 6.5 or vSphere 6.7, and then have some sort of workload migration factory that migrates those workloads either as is or by deploying new, and I've seen it with customers in both ways. So where they want to move the virtual machine from one place to another because they don't necessarily have all the instructions or the install guide that they had 5 years ago, or they just build new and migrate the application data to the new environment. So why would you do that? So 5 years is a long time. So your strategy and decisions that happened 5 years ago may be valid right now, but they may not be. So there's a lot more things happening or have happened in that time frame. So you might want to consider a full software-defined data center solution, including software-defined networking, software-defined storage, vRealize automation, cloud management, and all that sort of good stuff. Existing hardware, it won't be, if it's not supported from an upgrade perspective, then it may be beneficial for you to purchase new hardware and have a look at you might want to have a look at your hardware vendors. You might want to move from one named vendor to another named vendor. You might want to consider hyper-converged infrastructure where you buy and hyper-converged infrastructure is basically sort of rack mount servers, if you like, that have storage, networking, compute all together, and they link together to make a software-defined data center solution. So risks, is there time? Have you got time to migrate to 6.7 or 6.5? Is there buy-in from the business because there's going to need to be some budget there to do that. Last slide, I promise. So final thoughts. So don't panic is my big advice. Keep it simple. You have a deadline, but don't add complexity. For me, the target should be to upgrade to 6.5, subject to any hardware and software dependencies. I don't necessarily see the need for the complicated upgrade path to 6.7 if you're doing an upgrade. Only upgrade to vSphere 6 if you need to remain in support and you're going to decommission the environment, or as a stepping stone to 6.7. Only upgrade to 6.7 if you need a particular feature. If you upgrade to 6, don't suddenly stop working on it. You need to make an upgrade plan from 6 to 6.5, 6.7, or vSphere.next, because you've only got 2 years before end of support comes then. If you're going to buy new hardware and migrate your infrastructure, then I see no reason not to move to vSphere 6.7. If you're going to buy new hardware, consider the benefits of moving away from dedicated storage vendors and into hyper-converged infrastructure solutions like vSAN. Finally, migrating, so the other 3 options we sort of touted, I wasn't really going to talk about, but migrating to a vSphere-based cloud service may add too much complexity for the timescales that you have. Migrating to another hypervisor will add unnecessary complexity. It's not that you can't do it, it's just whether you can do it in the time frame that you need to do it. And migrating applications to the public cloud, making those cloud native, cloud ready, for me is adding a lot of complexity right now. So that may be where you want to go in the future from a strategy perspective, but getting off of vSphere 5.5 should be your priority. And there we go.
Apologies, had to change headsets. So the action points for you as the customers, after today's conversation, we've identified through Chris's sort of demonstration around the upgrade is looking at your next steps would be to contact BARTS, and BARTS would be your business partner in terms of your licenses and help you through that path. Extrovert will get involved through either a WebEx or a physical meeting with you as the client. We'll do some discovery and scoping with you, of which we will then give a proposal around the recommendations around the migration in itself. And then the last stage is engaging with BARTS again so we can get the go-ahead to start the delivery of the project, of which would include project management. So it's a very simple engagement between BARTS and Extrovert. We will just plug in the professional services whilst BARTS help you with the license upgrade in itself.
Okay, so to conclude this webinar, while we're going through this, if any of you have any questions, please start to submit them, and we'll do our best to answer them with the time we have left available. Really just wanted to wrap up the webinar by just highlighting a few areas and taking away some key points about what the VMware roadmap looks like, and why really that question there, why the need to modernize the data center. Many organizations have got very much a cloud first strategy, and they're considering how to do that. But whether that is part of your strategy or whether it's an on-prem arrangement that you are looking to pursue, either way, it's modernizing the data center, which is key to that. So looking at the reasons why most businesses are looking to do a cloud transformation and data center modernization, these are the main reasons that we're seeing in the market. Those three areas: greater agility, the greater cost efficiencies, and being able to innovate so that they can support new applications. It's very essential to what they want to do in the data center. So we're finding that's resonating with a lot of our customers. But what's holding them back is really these three areas. It's the manual provisioning of network and security services, which typically have been hardware based, so hold up the entire data center. There's complex processes that are really sort of slowing down the development of any application support in the data center. And then you've also got the fact that there's modern apps that are now being introduced that can't be supported on the architecture that is currently in the data center. So being able to move is why a lot of people are embracing the cloud, because there is that agility and that ability to provision at scale and very, very rapidly. But really, there's just the three things that need to be addressed to be able to undertake or really overcome the issues internally, as opposed to just move into the cloud. And it's these three areas: automating IT, modernizing your infrastructure, and just being able to support the running of those modern applications by means of an architecture that supports it. And VMware's vision is really just this fully software-defined data center. So not just considering VMware from a vSphere point of view, where they've been the market leader of being able to support virtualized workloads in your data center for the past 10 years, but really looking at how you can fully virtualize the infrastructure so it's a fully software-defined data center. And that would include using hyper-converged technologies like storage and networking, but then using the management layer also to kind of see how that can help you not only manage your internal data center, but also your cloud workloads as well. The vision from VMware just really looks like this, so that you'd be able to manage both your private cloud and public cloud and be enterprise ready on both platforms. So really, I suppose the key takeaway from this is that, yes, it's great to see you are looking at how you can get across from vSphere 5.5 and get onto the latest version. And we've had a great insight into how we can do that today, and all the features that you can expect to see on that new version. But don't just look at VMware from purely a compute virtualization point of view. Really have a look into what their other offerings are and how that can also help you modernize the data center, so that part of your roadmap to the public cloud, if that is something that you are pursuing as part of your strategy, can be something that can be supported from the back end. And we really just encourage you to get in touch so that we can help you with that. So if there are any questions, we'll be happy to now do a Q&A.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Pete and Lawrence and Chris as well for presenting. So as mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we'll hold a Q&A session now. So if there are any questions at all, there is a questions box just at the right-hand side of your screen. So if you type them in there, I'll read those out for the presenters shortly. Okay, so I don't think there are any questions. Chris, you must have covered everything off during the webinar, which is great. So thank you everyone for joining the webinar today, taking the time out of your busy days. And thank you, Chris, Lawrence and Pete also for presenting. There is an email address on your screen there if you would like to submit any questions kind of outside of the webinar today. And then, as mentioned at the beginning as well, there is a 3-question critique form at the end. So if you would like any more information, or if you have any feedback on the webinar today, please pop that in there. We'd really appreciate that. Okay, so thank you everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.